This presentation this week is intended to give you just an overview and an introduction to the notion of emotional intelligence. And is something that'll come into play throughout the course. And it's a budding field in the world of psychology, and starting to grab a hold in the business settings in terms of the ways that we go about engaging other people in the work that we need to do, such that we understand ourselves and our emotional connections, and kind of hot button trigger issues that get us motivated and get us upset and get us inspired, as well as those of others, and the connection that it has between the people who are working together. So this is a high level overview of this model. It's a very deep field. There's a lot of literature and research out there, and this is just going to be a quick introduction to this. Dan Goleman, who is the author of this quote here and author of several books, and this quote is taken from a book called Primal Leadership, is considered to be kind of the pioneer behind emotional intelligence. And he writes in his book that even if you get everything else just right, if leaders fail in the primal task of driving emotions in the right direction, nothing you do will work as well as it could or should. And really the basics behind this is, again, even if you have the best laid plans, if you aren't able to get people emotionally engaged and motivated behind what needs to be done, that plan's not going to go anywhere. So the objectives for this session is just to understand the basic premise of what emotional intelligence is, specifically as it applies in the workplace. This is also very applicable in your personal settings, but we're going to specifically talk about how this applies in the workplace. We want you to understand the importance of emotional intelligence as one way of engaging and motivating others. There are certainly many other ways you can do it, but emotional intelligence kind of provides a framework by which we can engage and motivate other people. And then it sets the foundation for further exploration. We're just going to scratch the surface with this, but I'll point to some resources, and we'll have ongoing discussions throughout the week and throughout the course that can help you dive into this further if you're interested. So the first question to think about is, how can emotions help or hinder our workplace? And to think that somebody walks into the door at work and they check everything at the door and they're fully ready and engaged to just dig into the work at hand for the day is not a realistic assumption. People come in to work with all sorts of things going on, happy and sad, frustrated, motivated, engaged, whatever the emotion may be. Some may help and some may hinder. And even on a very good, happy day, you still might be very distracted with what's going on and not be able to focus on what's going on in the workplace. So it is important to understand that and to find appropriate ways to connect with people and to have outlets for people to know what and how to appropriately engage with the emotional parts of what they bring to work. Now, there's an interesting distinction that we need to make between IQ and EQ. IQ is intelligence quotient, and EQ is kind of the corollary to that of the emotional quotient, or the emotional intelligence, the measures of emotional intelligence. And the research is becoming pretty clear on this, that IQ, your cognitive intelligence, your book intelligence, is a foot in the door. It remains relatively consistent through life. And what I mean by a foot in the door is, when you graduate from college or high school or whatever, and you're looking for a job, people look at your grades, your grade point average, and especially earlier in your career, where you don't have a whole lot of work experience, people are going to look to that. And IQ and your cognitive intelligence is certainly important, but your IQ remains relatively the same throughout your life. When you're a child, you take an IQ test, your IQ will be roughly the same later in life. And that's not to say you don't learn anymore, but your ability to learn remains roughly the same through life. EQ is different, and the research is showing it's a stronger predictor for sustained career success, meaning you might start at a lower level in terms of your EQ, but if you put intentional effort into it, you can develop it further with time. And that's really what the intent of this little mini module here is, to talk about this, of how can you plant the seed to continue to learn and grow and develop your emotional intelligence over time. It starts with your ability to understand and manage your emotions. If you can't understand or manage your own emotions, then it's very difficult to know how you're going to connect with other people, which is the last bit of tuning into the impacts that you have on others and that others have on you. Now, there are three essential components to this. There are many models you can think about here. And this is adapted from Jeff Russell, who is a consultant that I have worked with a little bit here and there over time. Cognitive intelligence starts with what you think, and this is loosely correlated to your IQ. How cognitively intelligent are you? What do you think? What do you know? Behavioral intelligence is how you act. That's kind of your cultural competency. In different situations, in different contexts, you're going to behave differently than in other situations. And so do you know how to read the situation and know how to act behaviorally? And then the third bit, which is where we're focusing today, is the emotional intelligence, how you feel. And it's not just how you feel yourself, but understanding what are going to be the things that spur different emotions in you, how you connect with other people, how you can read other people. And if you can find a way to operate right here in the middle, where your cognitive intelligence, what you think and know, and your behavior intelligence, how to act appropriately, and then your emotional intelligence, how to feel and engage with others appropriately. When you can find that hot spot in the middle, you're going to be in a pretty good shape to be effective in terms of your leadership and getting other people engaged and motivated to do the work that needs to be done. Now, there are many different definitions you'll find about emotional intelligence. Again, I pulled this one from Jeff Russell. The reason I like this one is there are multiple components here to consider that relate to the work that we're going to be doing here. And it starts with the ability to understand your own emotional makeup. So this is talking about yourself. And all the models we'll talk about here really starts with yourself, a self-awareness. So do you understand your own emotional makeup? And then after that, do you understand the emotional makeup of others? If you can't understand yourself, it's very difficult to appropriately and effectively engage with others. So let's presume you understand your own emotional makeup and you understand the emotional makeup of other people. The next step is then how do you use that insight from that knowledge to effectively manage and regulate your own emotions? Okay, so if you're self-aware, then you're better able to regulate your own emotions. If you're unaware, then you may fly off the handle and not really know why, because you're not aware enough of your own emotional makeup. So that's how you can manage and regulate, with the end point of being to make good decisions and act effectively. Okay, so decisions are one thing, but then is that followed up by the appropriate behaviors, which is the ultimate endpoint? Are you doing appropriate, effective decisions and actions? So that's one way to think about and defining this. In terms of how this relates specifically to employee engagement, leadership, when we talk about leadership of a strategic plan and management of that plan, it's largely an emotional intelligence role or function. Many leaders may not necessarily be the most technically sound person in the group, but they need to be able to know how to manage and motivate other people to get on board with what needs to be done. Depending on the surveys you look at, you see that many workers, in this particular case, 2/3 of the workers say that communication problems are the leading cause preventing them from doing their best work. And communication is at the bedrock of a lot of emotional intelligence. Poor communicators are likely going to also have lower levels of emotional intelligence. They don't know how to connect with other people in a communication way. And so if this many workers are saying that communication is the problem that leads to them preventing them doing their best work, that's a lot of lost opportunity when we could be working on our communications and improving our emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence predicts higher work performance 3 times better than IQ. And 50% of worker satisfaction is determined by the relationship a worker has with his or her direct boss, direct supervisor. And this may resonate with you in your personal experiences here too. So if half of your work satisfaction is determined by the relationship with your direct supervisor, then it's certainly incumbent upon us as supervisors to be able to connect with the people who report to us so that we can make sure that they're satisfied and connected and engaged and motivated to do the work that needs to be done. There's other reasons here too, and I'll just go through these relatively quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular piece of data here. But it also, employee retention is up. If you have managers who are connected to and engaged with their employees, it's going to help out with employee retention. Employee satisfaction, organizational commitment, and then employee adaptability. Even though that's a lower score of 8.3% as opposed to the others that are around 30 and 40, employee adaptability is critical in this day and age. With as quickly and as rapidly as organizations are changing, employees need to be able to be adaptable and go with it. And they're much better able to do that if they have direct supervisors who are emotionally intelligent and connected to what their needs and interests are. So when we think, if for those of you who are in high customer relations or customer service types of professions, 70% of the reasons that we lose customers are related to emotional intelligence. Poor service or poor handling of complaints, unpleasant interactions, lack of human connection. Yeah, you heard my words, but you didn't listen. These are all elements that relate to emotional intelligence and communications. And if those are poor skills, and we're losing 70% of the reasons for losing customers are related to this, then again, there's a bottom line, there's a return on investment if we put in the time up front to focus on the emotional intelligence of our staff, of ourselves and of our staff. Really quick on Biology 101 here. This is not a biology course. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do want to point out a couple of things here that help to explain how this works. Our brains are designed to be regulated internally and externally by our environment. And their environment includes not just environment such as lights and sounds and temperatures and things like that, but also our relationships with people and all that surround us with that. So as opposed to the circulatory system, which is a closed loop system, my heart is pumping and it's pumping blood through my body, but it's not going to have an impact on your blood and your heart pumping. That's in turn considered to be a closed system. But emotions are an open loop system, and we rely heavily on the connections with others for our own emotional stability. And we probably all heard the phrase or experienced experiences where you say attitudes are contagious, or you could feel the emotions in a room. Or you're having an interaction with somebody, you can just pick up on the vibe that's going on with them. That's because we are open loop systems with our emotions. We pick up on things that somebody else is saying or doing or how they're acting, and it's going to have an impact on us. So this is a model that gets to the heart of emotional intelligence. And as I mentioned earlier, well, actually before I go there, there's two dimensions here. There's on the left-hand side, there's the recognition of our emotions, and then there's the regulation of them, the management, the controlling of them. And then on the horizontal axis, we've got ourself. What do we do with ourselves as an individual? And we got others. That's the social component of it. How does this connect with other people beyond ourselves? And it starts with, I'm going to put a number 1 here, starts with the first quadrant of self-awareness. If we're not even aware and able to recognize our own emotions and self-aware, we can't consider how we would be able to do these other things. So it starts with self-awareness. From there, you can go in one of two directions. And this is not intended to be a totally sequenced thing, but one does build on the other. So from self-awareness, you can either go to social awareness, where you start to realize and recognize the emotional makeup of other people. I understand myself, now what's going on with other people. Or you can get to self-management, still keeping with yourself. But now, instead of just recognizing what my emotional makeup is, I'm able to manage it and control it some. And you might know some people who are very good at this and others who are horrible at this in terms of their self-management of their emotions. So once we're self-aware, and then we become more socially aware of what's going on with others, and we're able to manage ourselves, then we get to the fourth and final quadrant of this, which is relationship management, which is really the crux and the desired endpoint for the emotional intelligence model here, where we're able to manage the relationships that we have with other people because we are aware of ourselves, we're aware of them, and we're able to manage ourselves. And the ultimate output is a positive impact on others. And so you can see if you've got this, if you've got good relationship management and a positive impact on other people, you're going to be much better able to implement and get people engaged in the strategic management process. Now, as I mentioned, there is a power of self-awareness, and that really is the starting point. With self-awareness, if you have self-awareness and you're able to demonstrate that, you basically got a 50-50 chance of demonstrating self-management. So that's that first step. Remember, from the first quadrant to the second quadrant. If you're self-aware, then you're going to be likely able to demonstrate self-management. If you're not aware, then it's very hard to manage something if you're not aware of it. You're also going to have a 38% chance of having social awareness. So this is, if you're aware of yourself, you're going to have about a 38% chance of being aware of the emotional makeup of other people. Without self-awareness, so if you bypass that first step and you're not aware of what's going on with that, you have virtually no chance, just a 4% chance of demonstrating self-management. And that gets back to the point of, if I'm not even aware of what's going on with myself, I can't possibly manage it. And you have only a 17% chance of social awareness. If I don't know what's going on with myself, how can I be aware of what's going on with other people? So there's room to improve here. And certainly self-awareness gets you some higher numbers and better chances of doing this if that's where you can focus and start. So for the rest of the time we have, we're going to talk about, okay, instead of just a conceptual theoretical model, how do we do this? How does that look like in the workplace? And so that's moving from us to others. Let's assume that we are self-aware. So we've dealt with that first quadrant of the model. And now let's talk about working with other people. So when you get frustrated with somebody, and we all have at one point or another gotten frustrated with somebody at work, and again, this applies at home, but we're going to keep the context here at work. I always encourage people to ask themselves 3 questions. Before you just fly off the handle and start blaming somebody for what they've done, truly ask yourself these questions. How much is directly attributed to that person? How much is really their fault, whatever the issue is? The second question is, how much is you? How much did you contribute to the issue on hand? And the third is, how much of it has nothing to do with the people, but it's just the situation? Maybe it's something that's beyond the control of the 2 people we're considering here, but it's something about the situation. And if you do this and you pause just for a few seconds to think through these 3 questions, what you'll find is that it might significantly change your ultimate approach to this. It may very well be that the person is the one who's at fault, and it is directly attributed to them. And if that's the case, then you have that discussion with them and you figure out what to do. But oftentimes we also look at it and say, okay, maybe I'm part to blame too. So that's how much is you. And if that's the case, what can you learn from it and do differently? And some of it's also the situation. Something that may be totally beyond the control of either of you, but it's something that needs to factor into it, but that's different than blaming the person and getting frustrated with them. So this last line here says we can't control other people's behaviors, but we can control our responses to them. And that's critical to think about here. If we try to control and manipulate other people, it's going to be very difficult. But what we can do is to manage our responses to them. And that's the self-management part of this. If you're aware of yourself, then you can get to the self-management part. So then after that, if there are performance issues or if there is some frustration with people, I ask the question, what needs to change to enable an employee to succeed? It may be that they themselves need to change, that they need to step up their efforts. They need to get a particular set of training. They need to stop certain behaviors that are getting in the way of their success. But oftentimes it's not that. There might be a situational thing that's at play here. There may be obstacles in the way for them doing it. There may be personal dynamics they have with other people that we need to work on. Sometimes you just don't know. Now, I want to talk about level of readiness and how do you do something about this. Very few workplaces at this point in time have any sort of formal emotional intelligence training or mandate, or hey, you really need to improve your emotional intelligence by 10% by next year, and it's a performance goal. We don't really have those kinds of metrics yet. And so oftentimes this is a self-imposed, self-driven, self-directed kind of a thing where you want to learn about emotional intelligence and improve yourself professionally. Now, some people are at a point where they're not ready for this. They're at stage one here. They're oblivious. And they don't even know that there's a problem. And because they don't even know that there's a problem, they can't see the solution. And so that's a hard starting point. So part of that is maybe just raising their awareness that there's something that needs to be done about the work that they're doing. The second stage, which is where I think a lot of people fall, and maybe many of you find yourself falling in this particular stage, is contemplation. This is where you've got it. I understand what's going on. I see I need to improve something, but I don't really know what to do, so I need to substitute my current approach with some form of action to improve. And then the third level of readiness is preparation. And this is where we'll get to by the end of this session here, starting to think about preparation. Focusing on a solution, developing a plan. Sometimes this is in response to crisis or a clear need. You realize there's something I have to do, and this is really what is going to be the motivator behind what I'm doing. But sometimes it's just you realize, okay, I need to improve. I need to continue to learn, grow, and develop. And then the last stage is action. Start implementing the action plan. And we'll talk through some very basic steps of how you can do that here at the end of this session. In terms of moving to action, again, very few organizations are forcing this upon anybody. So the first question is there a motivation to change? Do you even care? And if you don't care, then it's kind of hard to change anything. The second step is to get feedback. And you can get feedback through self-assessments, and I'll point to a resource you can use to get an online self-assessment of your emotional intelligence, but also get feedback from others. We are, in many ways, perhaps the worst person to gauge our level of emotional intelligence. Typically, people tend to overestimate their emotional intelligence. And so self-assessments are fine, but you also want to double-check that with somebody else who knows you well. Once you've gotten feedback, then you identify the disconnects and define some of the focus areas. We all have areas where we can improve. We all have areas where we are strong. And once you find some disconnects between where you are and where you want to be, we can't do it all, so you define what are the focus areas where you want to begin to focus first. And that's where this last stage comes into play. What are the immediate things that you want to start on first that you need to do for where you are right now? What are midterm things that might help to get you to where you want to go? And the long-term steps to take. What are the long-term goals for the ultimate direction where you want to be headed? And if you can work your way through these 4 stages of moving to action, or the 4 steps of moving to action, you'd be in a pretty good place to at least get off the ground with starting with this. So now, the question then oftentimes becomes, what are the competencies of emotional intelligence? We've talked about this in broad, vague terms. What are some of the specific competencies that we need for this? Now, this is, although there's been a lot of work and research in this area, it's a relatively new field of study. And so unlike the IQ, where there is a test and you can take it and it's easily replicated, and people have done it many times, emotional intelligence is a little bit less defined and less rigorous at this point. There are many lists of competencies to consider. Some are easier to develop than others. And some competencies are more important than others. So for instance, depending on what your job is, or what job is that you aspire to next, or the industry you're in, or the number of people you supervise and manage, there may be some competencies that are much more critical to develop than others. Certain combinations of competencies may contribute to outstanding performance than others. So there's a lot of interlocking dependence between these. So just because you develop one competency doesn't mean that it is unrelated to the others. There's a lot of overlap here. And then the last thing I want to reiterate this here and emphasize this: you do not need to master every competency to be successful. There are many here to consider, And many people are successful and they don't necessarily consider themselves masters or even necessarily competent in some of these areas. And that's fine. You got to find the ones that are most important and most relevant to you. So here's a very quick first pass at some competencies that exist. Now, these are very hard to measure. I wouldn't say that there are any detailed specific quantitative metrics for some of these. But in terms of self-awareness, are you emotionally self-aware? Do you even know what your emotional hot buttons are? Are you accurate in your self-assessment? And this is where the feedback thing comes into play that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, where you can do a self-assessment, but until you get some external validation with other people who know you well, you might be totally off base with your self-assessment. And self-confidence. And not that confidence is everything, but are you confident in what you can and can't do? And do you understand what that is? If we move over here to social awareness, empathy, and we don't talk a lot about empathy in the business setting very often, but I think one of the critical skills to have is how can you put yourself in somebody else's place and truly understand what this issue is like from their perspective. That's a critical skill to have. Down here to self-management. Are you able to self-control? Or do you just fly off the handle and get really upset over little things that people don't know about? Are you adaptable? Or do you have kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to things in the workplace? Or are you able to read a situation and kind of manage your approach to that depending on that? And then the last bit here is relationship management. So are you able to exercise influence over other people without it being manipulative or without it being overly controlling? Do you put effort into developing others? This is a relationship management. Do you actually put time and energy into developing others and helping them become better at what they do? Are you good at conflict management with some of the relationships, teamwork and collaboration? So all these have to do with relationship management. Now, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to say, you know, on a scale of 1 to 100, I am 73 on empathy and 87 on influence. That's not a very likely thing that you can do. But what you can do is go across these competencies and kind of rate yourself on, good, developing, or not good. You know, kind of a red, green, and yellow light. So red meaning I'm not really good at this. I haven't really thought about it much. I need some work. Yellow light meaning, yeah, okay, I'm doing okay. Kind of got middle of the ground stuff. I kind of know what it is. I know what I need to do to learn and grow and develop more. And then the green light meaning, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. I feel confident in my ability to live out this competency. And if you map these competencies using that kind of red, green, yellow scaling, then you're probably going to identify which of these quadrants is the biggest challenge for you, and that can be a focus for where you start putting your further development efforts. Again, as I mentioned before, you can't do all of these at once, but choose the ones that are most relevant to you and move on from there. Self-awareness is a first step. This is heading towards the home stretch here. I just want to have a couple of summary slides here. The inability to understand your true feelings leaves you at their mercy. And it's very hard to intentionally act in response if you're unaware and unable to notice your true feelings. If you want a starter book or a place to start learning more about this, I recommend starting with this book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a relatively expensive book. You can probably get it for about $10 on Amazon. It provides you, it's a good book with resources, gives you an online assessment, and then access to resources online after that. And I just want to make very quick mention of this reverse correlation of scores here. Because these tools aren't highly as developed as some of the other quantitative measures, tools of things, there can be a reverse correlation of scores. And what I mean by that is, if you are a highly emotionally intelligent person, you know what your weaknesses are. And so when you go through these questions on these online assessments, you may downgrade yourself significantly because you know what the weaknesses are. On the other hand, if somebody has no emotional intelligence and is very unaware, they might think things are great. And so they would rate themselves very highly on some of these scales. And so it may turn out that somebody who is actually less emotional intelligent turns out to actually have higher scores than somebody who is more emotionally intelligent. So when I've spoken to the people who make up these tools and do this research, what they have said to do to kind of counteract that while they're working through all the ways that they can statistically filter this out, they say to look at yourself and look at your own personal trends over time. So if you take the test today and you take it again in a year, are you yourself seeing an improvement in the trends in your scores you have, and not necessarily get hung up on the comparisons to other people, because that the tools aren't necessarily set up to be that effective in that light. Strategies for promoting your emotional intelligence. Again, this is back to the application of how do we do this. Taking time for mindfulness, even just a few moments throughout a day, just to sit and pause and breathe and think about what's going on. Recognizing and naming your emotions. This is part of the self-awareness and the management of things, to understand your root causes of feelings. Okay, do you really understand what's going on? What's the root behind this? Differentiate between your emotions and your need for action. Sometimes we can get upset about something, feel very happy and excited about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to do anything about it. Sometimes we get hung up on the need to always act, and sometimes we just need to accept and observe what's going on. Managing our anger and frustration through learned behavior and abstraction techniques. I'm not talking about avoidance of things, because that just gets you into trouble. If there's conflict and you just avoid it, that's not going to serve anybody any good. But you can manage your anger and frustration through learning some of the behaviors, and some of these are listed here. Balance your gut feeling with rational decision-making process. And the last one is an oftentimes underrated communication skill of developing listening skills. Oftentimes we think about communication as outward communication, what you say to somebody else. But developing listening skills is critical to emotional intelligence, to communication, to leadership, and to management, and frankly to getting strategic plans and strategic management implemented. The steps to take: first of all, you get some feedback, so asking yourself, how can you gather honest, constructive, and useful feedback? And you can ask somebody, of these competencies that we listed, what do I demonstrate regularly? What do I demonstrate sometimes? And what are things that I do not demonstrate? After you get that feedback, you identify the disconnects. What are the primary disconnects? And what's a focus area where you're going to commit to taking action on it? A learning agreement. What can you realistically do and commit to do and agree to do? And this is critical, because you need to have realistic goals and something that you are personally motivated and committed to do. And then this other thing is, what are the things that you'd like to do, but maybe you're not able to do or willing to fully commit to? Maybe you know that this is something that you like to do or improve or learn and grow about, but the timing's not right now, or it's going to take too much energy at this point. And so instead of beating yourself up over it, just say, okay, I'll do, some other time. I'll come back to that one, and find something that you can realistically commit to doing now. And then the last bit here is do something. What will you do today, this week, within a month, within 6 months, and consider what you'll start, stop, and continue doing. There are things you can do today, even if it's just sitting and listening and committing to the fact that in any conversation you're going to have with somebody, you're truly going to sit and listen and not be distracted by what else is coming up. It's hard to do, but that can be a relatively reasonable starting point for you. Something this week, and within a month, and within 6 months. And if you do this and you make a concerted effort over time, you're going to see a difference and you're going to see a change. And I wish you the best of luck in doing that. So I look forward to ongoing conversations with this throughout the class and in the module this week. And please post any questions or further thoughts on this in the online forum. Thank you.